My guest on this episode is a hockey guy, but like most hockey guys I've met, he's also a golf guy. Ray Jacobs is the senior coordinating producer for the National Hockey League's production arm, a staff job he took in 2023 after 20-plus years on the road as a freelance golf producer. We touch on that familiar theme, freelancing versus staff, plus his experiences at golf's major championships and the Olympics, and why ultimately he left the road life. He explains how remote production has taken some of the fun out of sports TV, and turns the tables to ask me a couple of questions. My friend Ray Jacobs is a guest on Media Credentials.
I demand satisfaction.
My name is Whit Watson, and this is Media Credentials. I'm a sports announcer who's worked a lot of places. This podcast will peel back the layers of sports media and show you how the sausage gets made. Through interviews with industry pros and my own experience, you'll understand why you're seeing what you're seeing and who's responsible for it. Your media credentials have been approved. Funny story. Early into my tenure as a studio host at Golf Channel, somewhere around 2012, I was asked if I wanted to call live golf. There were a handful of events on what is now the Korn Ferry Tour that needed a play-by-play announcer. Now, I had experience calling basketball, football, and baseball, but never golf. But always say yes. Golf Channel televised about 10 tournaments a year on what was then called the Nationwide Tour, and I think I did 4 of them. On Sunday, after the fourth and final event, after the final putt dropped, I found the director and the producer in the TV compound and said, "Thanks for the opportunity. This is my last week. Hope to see you both down the road." And they both looked at me like I was an idiot. The producer said, "Whit, you're on this tour for the rest of the year. Didn't anyone tell you?" Well, no one said a word. But that's how I found out I was moving from studio to tournaments, which is the primary role that I played at Golf Channel for the next 10 years. The director in the compound that day was Pete Esposito, whose name you'll hear in this podcast. And the producer who broke the news of my career change was Ray Jacobs. Ray, Peter, and I would work together for several seasons on what is now the Korn Ferry Tour, along with Craig Perks, Phil Blackmar, and many others. A good group and a really fun tour, and a lot of great memories, a few of which I get to share with Ray. One of the best parts about starting this podcast has been the chance to catch up with friends. It gives me an excuse to reach out and talk to people that maybe I haven't talked to for a while. So, Ray, it's good to talk to you. How are things?
It's good. It's good. Great to hear your voice, Whit, and things have been good, and thanks for having me on.
Let's start at the end, which is a new job for you, relatively new job. You said about 5 months now. So what are you doing?
Currently, I took a job five or 6 months ago with the National Hockey League in New York City, their home office, and I'm working in the events and entertainment division of the company, which is the part of the company that puts on the special events that the league puts on, whether it's the All-Star Game, All-Star Week, it's the outdoor hockey games, which we have 3 to 4 each year. The NHL draft. I'm working with the team that is in charge of setting that up, putting it on from soup to nuts. So yeah, it was a big change for me since I was doing golf and for over 20 years. I had worked for the NHL as a freelancer because that's what I was doing for so many years, is freelancing for different companies and different aspects of the sports world. So it wasn't completely a brand new change. I knew the people I was going to be working with. And, at this point in my life, a lot of the boxes were checked from, a pension and in the 401k and insurance for my family, all that stuff. Everything, kind of fell into place. So I had to take it.
Men of a certain age. I get it. Believe me. So first of all, you dropped our first golf of the podcast. Thank you. That took about 2 minutes. And, as someone who's been wearing headsets in the truck for all these years, as you said, are you still going to be producing games?
I will still be producing a handful of golf events that I've been doing the world feed for the majors, for the Masters, PGA Championship, and the US Open for a number of years. So I will continue to do that as a bonus to the new job that I have. So yes, thankfully I'm still involved in it.
So let's go back to the beginning. Where did you grow up and how did you develop an interest in the business in the first place?
I grew up in Oceanside, New York, which is the South Shore of Long Island. It's about an hour east of New York City. Grew up, went to college up in upstate New York. It's SUNY Brockport. Studied psychology up there, of all things, and realized quickly once I graduated that I did not want to go back to school for that. So kind of was in a position where I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And, back then, I'm sure you remember, Whit, when you sending your resume out, you had headhunters, which you literally had a guy that you went to, gave your resume to, and he would send it out to companies. I had one of those people. And, I said, I don't want to do psychology. And he was like, well, what else do you like? And I said, I love sports. I love golf. And he sent me a couple of places, a couple of local radio spots, radio places. And the last place I went to was a company called IMG. And I had certainly heard of them. And unfortunately, the only job there was in the mailroom. So I said, you know what, I'll take it. I just want to get into this company. And so, yeah, I started in the mailroom and kind of worked my way up. That was 1994-ish. Did the mailroom for a couple of years. And then they had a sports production part of the company called TWI. So I eventually moved over there and was working on the projects that they were doing. And one of them was, and I did so many different sports because they produced so much stuff back then. One of them was back in 1996 when Tiger Woods announced he was becoming a pro. He was an IMG agent at that time. And one of the events or shows that I worked on in 96 was kind of like a documentary on Tiger because he was one of the clients for IMG. And it was called Tiger Woods Sun Hero Champion. So for a little over a year, I worked on that show. And, I was down in Miami, Florida at a local golf course, interviewing Tiger for an entire day with his father and, shooting specialty stuff with him. And that show actually aired in 1997 on CBS, the hour before the final round on CBS. And, the rest is history with Tiger. He went on to win by 12 shots that year at the Masters. And then I was hooked on it. I had always loved golf, but I was hooked on it. And I eventually fell into the production of the world feeds, which IMG still owns the international broadcasting rights for the Masters and the PGA Championship. So I started working on that, and then that got me into the golfing career.
To back up for a second, you played football in college, is that right?
I did, yeah, I did. I played all my life up through high school, and I played quarterback most of my career up until my junior year in high school. And I'm not sure if you remember the quarterback Jay Fiedler.
Sure.
I played high school football with him. He kind of came up and sort of took the starting role for quarterback from me. So I was, defensive back. I was playing both ways, and I graduated high school and really wanted to just continue playing. So I went up and I played defensive back, strong safety for Brockport up in upstate New York.
So where did the love affair with golf start if you were playing football your whole life?
Well, I never was on a golf team. I always, played with my father and my brothers growing up. I just loved it. When I had free time, I was always playing golf. So once I graduated college, I was always playing golf. So I've always had an affinity for it.
From IMG to many years producing events for Golf Channel, which is how you and I met each other.
Yeah.
How did that transition come about? Did you meet somebody in the compound while working for IMG?
Yeah. Pretty much. It was, working on those world feeds, which I said I started producing those. It was, I believe it was an EVS operator named Eddie Koffoltz. I'm sure you remember him.
Sure.
He said, hey, we could use someone like you at the Golf Channel. We're always looking for people. I could put your name in with Jack Graham, who was the executive producer back then. And I said, yeah, sure. So, Jack gave me a call, and I left IMG and started working at the Golf Channel. And I jumped right into working on the Korn Ferry Tour. Back then it was the nationwide tour. And, I was working under a producer named Keith Hirschland. I know you had him on the program, and I just was a sponge to him and, learned a lot from him. And then when he left, I took over producing the nationwide tour / Korn Ferry Tour back then. So that's how I sort of got into that.
And that kind of leads me to the next question, which is, who are some of the people, as you were learning how to produce golf on television, which is not the easiest sport in the world to produce, who were some people that influenced you or helped you learn the process?
Doing world feeds, it's a really different way of producing. I won't get too into the weeds with it, but you're really just following along, listening to the host producer or the broadcast producer. So I did that for so many years, listening to, the Tommy Roys and Lance Barrows, and just listening to them and how they produced, and then jumping in and working beside Keith Hirschland. He was a big influence in how he produced, and the culture that he produced within the truck was great. He had a real way of making everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room, and that their job was important. And so those people, I think, because when you're in a truck and you're producing or you're working in a truck in any capacity, it's a real team effort. And, I've always been a team sport guy, going back to baseball, football, and all the things I grew up doing. And sitting in a truck and producing a show or working on a show in a truck is no different. You're always looking to do your best for your teammates. And so that's sort of the philosophy in the truck. And that's how I kind of learned it from Keith and those other guys.
Keith and I talked about this on the podcast. He is very much in favor of showing as many live golf shots as possible. And that is also something that Tommy Roy at NBC is known for. He, for example, doesn't want his walking reporters to call a shot off of tape. And for those who are outside the golf television world, there's only so much of that you can do. You have to put shots on tape because everybody is on the field everywhere all the time, and you can't show everything live. And for example, the guys at CBS like to stack up shots on tape. They can then play back in some sort of a look live order. Do you have a philosophy on producing golf? Is there a preference as to how many shots you show off tape and how many you show live?
To answer your question, no, I didn't really have a specific philosophy on that exactly. It sort of dictates the pace of play, and what's going on dictates what you can show live and what you can't. There's so many shots being hit at the same time, and I'd say 10 to 12 to 15 guys could be in the mix around the top of the leaderboard, and you sort of have to plan for what you're going to show live. And obviously the guys closest to the top of the leaderboard, you want to show live. And it's difficult to do. And golf is a very different sport in terms of how it's produced compared to other sports. And you can't think what's the next shot I'm going to show. You have to think what's the next shot I'm going to show, and then what after that, and then what after that. And it's a really quick paced environment, and you can't always show shots live. So you have to rely on the other people in the truck to help you out, because as a producer, you're in charge of telling the story and talking to the announcers on in their ears and talking to graphics, and you can't keep track of everything that's going on. So you really have to rely on there's a spotting and scoring person in the truck that's just in charge of keeping track of those 15 to 20 players that are close to the leaderboard and what their scores are and what shots are important. And that person in turn is talking to the tape director back in videotape and saying, hey, this guy just stuck it close. He's 4 off the lead. You probably should put that on tape. And it's just a constant, back and forth and trying to figure out what to show. So as a philosophy, it's just, it changes by the second in the truck. You just try to tell the best story you can as it pertains to what's going on the golf course.
One thing that people outside golf don't understand, I think, is that the play-by-play guy, the host, and the hole announcers are calling golf off of a television monitor. We can't possibly see the entire golf course at once, which is very different from virtually any other sport. If you're in the booth at a baseball game, you see the whole field. Football, same way. Soccer, same way. You're just watching it with your own 2 eyes and reacting to what you're seeing. The announcers have to rely on Ray Jacobs, the producer, with the voice in your ear telling you where we're going next, who it is, what shot, and what hole. And you just talked about relying on the people in the truck, and you touched on this a little bit, but I want to get a little bit deeper. What positions in the truck, in other words, what jobs in the truck are most important to you in order to get that information correct?
I would say the spotting and scoring person and the tape producer are easily 2 of the most important production positions in the truck when it pertains to the producer, because the spotting and scoring person is staring at not only his scoring computer, but he's looking at the monitor, seeing, we have 30 to 50 monitors in front of us. Every hole is covered, and every green and every fairway and every tee box. And that person's job is crucial because they have to watch the leaderboard and at the same time watch the monitors and see what the people who are important to the telecast are doing. And it's a tough job. I've done it on a few occasions, and it's really difficult. And the good ones can do it easily, and they in turn will relay that information to both the producer in a live situation. If I'm on a shot and it's some player putting for birdie and he misses, that spotting and scoring person can say, hey, we have player B, 4th place, putting live for birdie right now on whatever hole. And it's up to the producer to say, all right, cool, let's go there. Or to say, let's stay here and show the next putt of the group that we're covering, because that's important too. If that's the choice that the producer makes, then obviously we're not going to make it live to that shot that the spotting scoring person was queuing up. So that person immediately says to the tape producer, hey, put that putt in the red machine. And so that putt is queued. And there could be 5 or 6 other shots that happen at that same moment that are important. And it's up to those 2 positions to figure out whether or not they want to record them and whether or not they want to sell it to the producer. Once it's sold to the producer, it's up to that person to say, all right, let's go to the red machine. That was good. Let's get it out of the way. Or, hey, this guy's on the tee box live. He's in 5th place. It's a par 3. Let's go there live. So it's a constant trying to figure out what shot makes the most sense to go to and show on the screen. I don't know if any of that made sense, because it's a lot, and it's hard to put it into words, but it's an extremely chaotic pace going on in the truck for a sport that when you watch on TV, I'm as guilty as any on a Sunday rainy afternoon. I love to just put golf on and sort of fall asleep. It's a little different in the truck.
No, it's like the duck on the pond. It's very calm up top and churning furiously underneath the waterline.
That's exactly right.
In my experience, the scoring and spotting position and the tape producer position are excellent preparation for being the producer of the show overall. Do you find that to be the case?
Yeah. Yes, definitely, because they're almost producing the show themselves. That they have to make decisions on what's important and what's not, and sell it. It's a perfect stepping stone into a producer, and almost 100% of the time, those positions do become producers or directors.
What is the communication process like with the director? I have only had one director on the podcast, and I've got to rectify that. And it was Eric Rutledge, who wanted me to say hello, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And he mostly produces studio events. And I know that directing live events, especially golf, is a different animal. So what's the communication like between you and the director sitting next to you?
Well, I sort of alluded to it. The producer sort of is the one making decisions on the story of the show, what shots you want to see at that exact moment. The director is in charge of executing that in terms of getting it on the program screen. If I say, "Hey, let's go to 13th tee live," it just doesn't happen. It just doesn't pop up on the screen. The director hears me say that. The director says to the 13th green camera, "Hey, come wide. We're going to do a slow wide to push." And he'll say, "All right, stand by to take that camera." You take that camera, and the person sitting next to him is the TD. He'll punch the button. 13 green camera will be on, and the director will say, "All right, slowly push to the tee." So we'll stay there for that shot, and then the producer will again decide where we're going and relay that to the director. Director relays it to the cameraman. Once the shot is set, he tells the TD to punch it up. So it's a constant. The producer is constantly telling the director what he wants to see. The director is actually the one executing it.
The TD, the technical director, I've always thought has to be one of the most high pressure jobs in the truck. I mean, you're the guy or the woman who is responsible for physically pushing the button that pulls up that camera or that tape machine or that graphic. And if you see photographs of TV trucks, it's all the lighted buttons on the panel in front of the guys in the front. I've always thought that's got to be an amazingly hard job to learn how to do. What types of people are good at that job?
I agree. It's just like you said. It's people who are very, very technically smart and can work under extreme pressure because, like I said, the pace and energy and stress level is extremely high in a golf production truck. And he's the last line of defense. He's the one that's actually pushing the buttons. And I'm not going to simplify it and say he just pushes buttons because, the director could say, "Stand by to take 13 green camera." He pushes that button and then say the putt goes in and there's 3 or 4 other angles that we had back in tape that we want to replay. The director will quickly say, "All right, stand by to replay to the red machine." And the TD needs to know where the button is to hit the effect because it just doesn't cut. There's an effect that happens. He needs to know where that is. And then, hey, we're gonna wipe out to a full page graphic on the B machine. It's a wipe, and he has to hit the button which has the wipe that it needs to wipe exactly at the same time to the B graphic machine. And there's a lot going on over there. I won't even pretend to know how it happens because I've never done it. I just see that person over there, and I can't imagine the pucker level that is going on in the TD position.
Now, of all those positions we just talked about, the director, the technical director, scoring and spotting, tape producer, your chance to give shout outs. Who are some of the best, some of your favorites in all those positions?
Directing, and we worked with him, Pete Esposito was one of my favorites, is one of my favorites. I worked with him for so many years. Another one is Emmett Lochran. Great director, great guy. TD, I think, one of the best on some of the biggest shows I've ever worked on was Doug Wetz. He's just a fantastic guy and a great TD. Graphics wise, I'd say our old friend Ethan Ritz. You can't get much better or knowledgeable person in that role. It's one thing for me to come up with a graphic list at the beginning of the show and give it to graphics and say, "Hey, this is cool. How about building this?" It's another to have someone like Ethan come in with like 10 to 15 other great stat-driven graphics and say, "All right, how about these too?" Those are some of the people that go above and beyond and who are great people. And like I said earlier, it's not just how much but it's how much of a team player you are, because you go on the road and you're on the road and you're away from your family, and the last thing you want to do is have it feel like a job and walk in and be like, see people that you don't necessarily get along with. And you want to walk in and have fun with the group you're with, and have them be friendly with you, and that breeds creativity and a great work environment. So it has a lot to do with how good the people are personally as well as work wise.
Being on the road is something that we deal with in this industry, no matter what your job is, no matter what sport you're covering. How has it been for you over the years in terms of balancing life at home and life with your family and life traveling and doing your job?
As a freelance and specifically doing golf, you're always on the road. It's one of the reasons why I left it was as a freelancer, especially, and this, you don't want to say no to too many jobs, and you're always taking jobs because you don't know what's next. And then all of a sudden you find yourself on the road for 30 weeks, which is what I was doing, over 30 weeks a year, and you're away from your family, and it's tough, and you have to do it in terms of taking these jobs, but it's tough being on the road. I will say technology made it a little bit easier over the years. Back when we were doing it with no FaceTime, it was just a phone call. And now with FaceTime, you at least get the personal touches with seeing your family. But it's rough. It's rough, and I think everyone who's a freelancer who works on the road for weeks and weeks at a time, it's tough. And like I said earlier, if you can be away and at least have people with you on the road that you get along with and can have fun with, and go out with, it makes all the difference. And the team building that happens goes a long way. We saw it, when you took over as play-by-play on the nationwide tour. We had a lot of fun. We had a great crew, people I still keep in touch with, and it wasn't as bad as it could have been, because not only did we have fun together in the truck, but God, all the things that we used to do away from the truck, hey, let's meet down in the hotel lobby bar and we'll go to dinner, or hey, tomorrow we're not on air until 5 p.m. How about we wake up and play golf? Or the days of, whitewater rafting in Boise, all that stuff that we used to do, everyone was doing it because we got along with each other. And that bond that we had made it so much easier to work on the road.
I totally agree with you about the Korn Ferry Tour, back then the nationwide tour. That was a really fun group, and it was kind of like us against the world. Not that that tour was in any way less than any other tour, but we sort of felt like we were watching players at the beginning of their careers. We were seeing guys that were going to be stars on the PGA Tour before anybody knew who they were. And that tour plays in some really cool places. You mentioned Boise, which I think is one of my favorite cities in America, and it's based on all the time I spent there with that tour. What were some of your favorite stops on that was the nationwide, now the Korn Ferry Tour?
Well, that definitely was, not just because it was a great spot to do these extracurricular things like whitewater rafting and everything. It was, for me, coming from New York, I never could have imagined going to Boise, and to show up there and see what a great little city that is, especially with the downtown area. And we had a couple of people on our crew that like to go out, myself included, and we certainly didn't let loose in Boise because it was such a great little college town and so much stuff to do at night. But that's definitely one of them. Probably one of my favorites would be Greenville, South Carolina.
I knew you were going to say that. Yeah.
I mean, there could not be a better setup of an event or a little town. The city of Greenville is it's one main street, tree-lined bars, restaurants, and the event that, the BMW charity program that took place basically took over that whole town. And, there was concerts and, all the celebrities that would come. So that was a great one also. there's a little spot up in outside of Erie, Pennsylvania that we used to do it. It was the Lecom Challenge. That was another good spot, another spot that no one would ever think of that would be a good spot. But like I said, we had such a good crew that you could put us anywhere and we'd make the most of it. I mean, I remember we rented a pontoon boat, me and Ethan and like 15 of us somewhere outside of Ohio. And we were like, I think on the Ohio River. And, we had a day off, which is unheard of, but we had a day off and we rented this boat and it was a beautiful day and everyone was swimming. It's times like that yet that you remember. And it's, making the most out of everywhere you go, which was a lot of fun for us.
I was not there that day, but I've heard about that trip. It's legendary. And the details will be left out of the podcast.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Yes. Going off the road and going back to the office and the remote model. And I've talked about this with various people on the podcast, no matter what the sport. I mean, during the pandemic, ESPN was broadcasting college basketball with the announcers in their living rooms, calling it off of television monitors with a camera pointed at their face. With golf, we're seeing more and more of it. The PGA Tour Live model, those announcers are remote. They're in a trailer in St. Augustine. Golf Channel is trying it now. They're not fully remote at most of their events, but they are bringing more and more people into the home office in Stamford, Connecticut, and orchestrating the event from distance. How much? At first, it's not going away. That we know, but
unfortunately, it's not.
Unfortunately, it's not going away. But how do you see that changing the landscape of sports broadcasting in general?
It's changed already. It's a strange thing because, you and I both grew up in the industry, like we keep talking about, going to events and going to all these golf events or as freelancers doing all these different things. And it's sort of, I won't say it's taken the fun out of working in the business, but in a way it has, because one of the biggest events there is the Olympics. And that's for me one of the most fun events I've ever worked on was the Sydney Olympics, going to Sydney, being there for 6 weeks. Big events like that. They're all now, as you said, being done out of a studio somewhere, whether it's Stanford or P-Gate down in St. Augustine. I certainly won't say it's taken the fun out of it, but it's made it very different. You're not on site in Sydney or St. Augustine or wherever. You're in a city with just the people that you work with, and it was fun. Everyone was doing something after work, and there was an excitement about being away. And now, at least for me personally, I don't think it's as fun. I don't think that the people who are in charge of making these decisions, people in charge of all the money, I think they think it's great because they're probably saving a ton of money. But for us, the workers, it's certainly not the same. It'll never be the same again. I think that the young kids getting into the business now, unfortunately, aren't going to experience what we experience in terms of seeing the world and seeing these cities and experience all different cultures and stuff. So it's definitely it's changed forever. And whether that's good or bad is subjective. But for me, it's going to be a very different way of working in the business from here on. Especially, I mean, like the Olympics are coming up. I know they're doing almost all of the Olympics out of Stamford, Connecticut, which is a shame. But I mean, it's money wise, economically, it makes sense for the company. But in terms of all the workers, a little bit different going to Stamford, Connecticut than it is Paris, France.
The number that I saw, Ray, was 4,000 people in Stamford during the Paris Olympics. That's the number that I saw. It's
crazy. It's crazy. I mean, the only people going to the actual events now are the technical people, the cameramen, and the people that need to support those people. Everything, with the advent of sports television the way it is now, all you need is a good, strong signal, Wi-Fi or fiber line, and you can do any sport from anywhere, anytime. And as long as the number crunching people are involved in it, they're going to find ways to do it as cheap as possible for the best bang for their buck. And you can't blame them, but it's changed the sports landscape forever.
You mentioned the Sydney Olympics. What were some other events that were the most memorable, the most significant for you?
Like I said, that was probably the biggest one because it was Sydney. It was on the other side of the world, and it was one of my first big events. But since I was doing golf for so long, the Masters is by far my favorite event, golf or any sport, because of how special it is. And the minute you step on Augusta's grounds, you realize you're in a different spot in terms of rules and overall feeling. So the Masters, Pebble Beach. I did a couple of U.S. Opens out there. I love that. The Open Championship. I know I'm rattling off all golf specific things, but that's kind of what I've been doing for so long. So some of those events would be, I guess, on the top of my list.
You've mentioned a lot of people that you've worked with over the years, and you mentioned how you got started at IMG. And one question I get asked a lot, especially by people who are considering a career in sports media, is the importance of relationships and networking and keeping up with people. What kind of importance would you assign to that in terms of how you've progressed in your career?
It's a huge importance. If you think about it, back when, I guess we're about the same age. Back when we were starting, I'm not sure what your first role was with in the sports world or broadcasting world, but we all start at the low end of the totem pole and kind of try to work our way up. And I think, it's important not only to, respect everyone and be nice to everyone, but keep those relationships intact as you go. Obviously, you're not going to be friendly with everyone forever, but if you think about it, and I've thought about this a lot, is the people who we started out with back in the day are all in the same boat. We've all worked our way up. And now, looking at where I am now, and I'm sure it's the same for you with where you are now, those people that we had relationships with are now not PAs anymore. They're now in senior roles, and they're running companies. And it just goes to show how, not that we would burn bridges, but just to keep up with people and, be friendly with people, because you never know. Now we're all high up in some of these organizations, and it's just so important to keep up with it. So I'm sure for you it's the same, right?
Absolutely. And I was just thinking, when you were talking about people that I interned with who are now vice presidents.
Yeah.
And that just talks about the fact that we're old, Ray, for one thing. But,
Yeah, we know that.
We know that. But yes. And speaking of Eric Rutledge, he teaches the Introduction to Sportscasting class, Sportscasting 101, at the Dan Patrick School of Sportscasting at Full Sail University right here in Winter Park, where I live. And
Right.
I was just speaking to one of his classes this morning, the day that you and I are recording this.
Oh, wow.
And he put it thusly. He said, be kind, be nice. It costs nothing to be nice. And more importantly, you'll be remembered as the guy who was nice. And don't just be nice. It's not a question of sucking up. It's a question of being authentic and you treat people the way that you want to be treated. And he,
Exactly.
for example, brought up, stories about watching talent at Golf Channel, including guys who were auditioning for jobs, and paying attention to how they speak to the camera operators and how do they speak to the guys that's putting on the mic. When they think no one is looking, and the camera's not on, how do they act? And
that says a lot about a person. Yep.
Completely agree with that. I think that's the truest test, is how do you act when you think no one's watching?
Yep. It shows a lot of character in how you act with people like that. Yeah. Then let me turn it around. What were some of your bigger, most favorite events throughout your career?
I love getting asked questions on my own podcast. This is awesome. I'm with you. The Masters, I think, is the best run sporting event in the world. I've been to the Indy 500. I've been to the NBA Finals, the Stanley Cup Finals, the World Series. I've never done a Super Bowl and don't really have a desire to. But the Masters is the best run event I've ever attended. And as you say, as long as you play by their rules, it's actually a very relaxing place to be. It's, there's nothing of the overt commercialism. There aren't any beer gardens. There's no signage. It's just green jackets and golf and patrons. And
Yeah.
to me, it's almost like a mental break. I don't feel tension when I'm there at all. I feel like it's not reality. You're kind of going
Yeah.
into a golf bubble for a week. And the history obviously speaks for itself, but I agree with you. That is one of my favorite events. And some of the spectacle events, the Indy 500 was awesome. That's a lot of
Yeah.
fun. Just it's
Yeah.
one day and the whole state shows up and the history there as well. Those would be two of mine that really stand out over a long career.
Especially Whit, for you, I know I used to see you at the Masters every year. Like, especially for you working for Westwood One back in the day. I mean, it's so cool that you got to have a little one-on-one in your own room with the winner of the Masters every year. I mean, that's a very cool memory to have, right?
I have chills when you say it, and I'm not exaggerating. It was
Yeah.
my favorite part of the week was, first of all, the scramble and the tension, the pressure to get that interview, because that was literally the reason why I was there, Ray. I had to get the
Yeah.
winner's interview. Never mind
Crazy.
the 20 interviews I did up until Sunday afternoon. I have to get that interview. And, sometimes it comes easy and sometimes it doesn't. And I told a long story elsewhere on the pod about interviewing Tiger the year he won it in 2019. I'll remember that for the rest of my life. The place was going nuts, and
Sure.
staff members at Augusta National were coming out to applaud him as they drove him in a golf cart to the press center. It was bedlam, and
Yeah.
the patrons refused to leave. They just stood there and roared at Tiger
It
as he
was an
rode by on a golf
unbelievable
cart.
scene. Yeah.
You were there.
Yeah.
I know you were there. What were your memories of 2019?
I think we were all just sort of in shock, by the magnitude of what we knew was happening. I don't think anyone, maybe except for Tiger Woods, thought he was going to come back and win the Masters ever again. And for him to come back and beat the John Rahms and the Schefflers and all these players with his condition, the way he was. And, when you're sitting in the truck, you try not to, and I'm sure it's for you, especially for you, since you're actually speaking on air, to not get too caught up in the moment. And, I remember all of us in the truck after Tiger won, he putted out, and, they have this nice, steady cam. They call it an Atlas cam. It's kind of got a different look on it these days. I just remember them taking that shot. I was producing the world feed, so I told our announcers, and CBS did the same thing. I said, let's just don't say a thing.
Lay out. Yeah.
And he puts out, and they take that camera, and literally Tiger's walking towards the camera. The camera's backing up, and it takes him from the green through the crowds. He's hugging his kids, and literally it was hard not to start like tearing up and crying, because as a golf fan, and you too, and I think everyone who enjoys the sport was just in shock. And it was so cool. It was like 2 or 3, maybe 4 minutes of him just walking towards the clubhouse, and I'll never forget that. And I remember sitting there going, this is unbelievable.
Well, it was history. That was my thought, was how lucky are we to have witnessed this? This could be one of the most significant major championship wins in the history of the game. And I'm standing 2 feet away from him, interviewing him after the putt drop. Yeah, that was crazy. So on that topic, do you have, and I ask this question a lot, do you have a bucket list? Are there events out there that you would someday, regardless of situation, would like to work on?
I mean, there are bucket lists, but I'm unless my career drastically changes, I know I'll never work on it. But I being an NFL fan, I love football. I'm a, Jets season ticket holder. I've always wanted to work on an NFL game, and I just, my career path never went that way. But that's definitely the biggest on mine, to work one. Knock on wood, it probably never happened, but that's definitely, of all sports, my biggest. And to go to, like a World Cup final soccer game. I know soccer's huge around the world, and everyone says it's bigger than any sport. And so those two, I think a Super Bowl and a World Cup final soccer game would be mine.
Other than the remote model, which we talked about already, what are some of the biggest changes in sports media, in sports television that you've witnessed over your career?
I sort of alluded to it. It is just if you have a fiber line or a strong internet connection, anything can be produced from anywhere, and you can voice over something from anywhere. So, I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, even cameras these days, I know working for the Golf Channel, and even the PGA Tour entertainment stuff that I've done, we've used cameras that don't require an RF signal and don't require a cable. They run off of a Wi-Fi signal.
Yeah,
so
essentially they're cell phone cameras.
yeah, it's a camera with a bunch of cell phone packs on the back of it. So I think that's the biggest thing, for in my career lifetime is just the advent of remote production. And we've talked about it, and it's not going away. And 20 years ago, would we ever think it was like this? No. And I can't imagine what is going to be different 20 years from now, because technology is going so fast that it's changed so much, and I'm sure it's going to change immensely over the next 15, 20 years.
I mentioned speaking with Eric's class this morning at Full Sail, and people approach me because, again, we're old. I get approached a lot by people who are considering careers in sports media. How do I start? What would you recommend I do? What classes should I take? I'm sure at some point or another you get approached and asked questions like that. So what do you say? What are your stock answers?
In terms of how to learn the business?
Yeah, how to get started. Like what would you recommend? If somebody asked you for advice, saying I'm a college kid and I really want to produce live sports, what do you tell them?
I mean, I would say I don't think they necessarily need to do what I did, which was start in the mailroom somewhere. But I think starting at a introductory level position at whether it's a network, production company, or wherever, I think starting at a low position and learning as many of the jobs as you can is a great way to, when you eventually work your way up, because if you have half a brain and you're a nice guy or girl and you have a good work ethic, you will move up. I mean, it's just in terms of putting the miles in and putting the hours in, you will move up. And when you eventually get to that position, whatever it is, certainly doesn't have to be producer or director. It could be anything. When you get to that job, it makes it, I think, easier to do that job when you understand what all the other positions are doing. If you jump right into a producer position and you start yelling about, give me something, and it's literally impossible for that task to be done at that second. If you knew the job and knew all the jobs and knew all the positions, you would never say that. You would know that if you wanted that, you need to say it well beforehand and give the person 10, 15 minutes to build a graphic or to build that highlight pack or to build this little sequence that you want. So knowing all those jobs, I think, is key to being successful once you land the job that you really want.
In just a few seconds, we'll have some closing thoughts on this episode, so stay tuned. If you're enjoying it so far, please consider subscribing or sharing and leave a review. Let me know what you'd like to hear in the future on Media Credentials. No surprise that Tiger Woods pops up on this podcast. Ray talked about Tiger's historic 12-shot win at the 1997 Masters, hello world, and the 2019 Masters when Tiger won at the age of 43. That tournament was all about numbers. 43 years old, his fifth green jacket, his 15th major championship, coming after 4 back surgeries. And he won on a Sunday when 10 players had a share of the lead or got within 1 shot of the lead at some point during the final round. Unforgettable. Last couple of points, you heard Ray mention P-Gate. If you read the blog, cough, cough, you know that P-Gate means PGA Tour Entertainment, the tour's current broadcasting facility at the World Golf Village in St. Augustine, Florida, a studio that will eventually be replaced by a new building under construction in Ponte Vedra Beach, speaking of remote production. And lastly, a shout out to Boise. As Ray said, we get to visit some pretty cool places while chasing golf. Boise is one of the coolest. Every year, over 125,000 people float the Boise River from Barber Park through downtown past the Boise State campus to Ann Morrison Park and then grab a free shuttle bus back to the put-in. Our Golf Channel crew did it together one year, and I went back the next year and did it myself. Highly recommended. And bring a camera. Thanks again for listening to Media Credentials. For examples of my work, including video and audio clips, a blog, and my contact page, check out whitwatson.com.